had been extremely bothered by his inability to stop this cycle of incidents, so he premeditated to stand his ground murder scenario, and in fact even called 911 as an alibi to use later in his stand his ground self-defense claims that he would later use in his case. I believe that Trayvon Martin had learned that George Zimmerman was a racist who was harassing him, his brother, his friends or acquaintances, and that's why he referred to George Zimmerman as a weirdo cracker, and Trayvon was at times playing cat and mouse with Zimmerman, trying to show and prove that he was able to act freely and legally where and whenever he wanted to by cutting through Zimmerman's patrol zone. And that pissed Big Boss George off, so Zimmerman decided to teach him the ultimate lesson, and that lesson turned out to be the premeditated murder of Trayvon Martin. That murder stand your ground scenario had been discussed and greenlit by certain racist cops. Trayvon would not have referred to a random white guy as a weirdo cracker. This word, cracker, to most black individuals means a racist white man. Whites who are known to be anti-black are considered crackers. Trayvon Martin might have had encountered Zimmerman before, probably climbing over his father's fiance's back wall and cutting through the Zimmerman gated community regularly, and on his way back home, would often outrun and lose George Zimmerman and disappear back into his backyard. Zimmerman had no idea that he was often staying at his father's fiance's house, or even where that house was. But several times, Zimmerman had been outfoxed by Trayvon, leaving Zimmerman wondering if he was a burglar that might even be hiding in houses that he was burglarizing when he would outsmart and lose Zimmerman. In any case, Zimmerman was failing in his own mind, and he knew Trayvon Martin was making him look and feel bad about his inability to keep Trayvon out of his housing tract, or even figure out where Trayvon was coming and going from. In Zimmerman's mind, Trayvon was the burglar he was referring to as the idiot coon who always gets away. Trayvon knew he was like a cat being chased by a racist MMA-trained pit bull who had been outsmarted one too many times before, and if George were to ever finally catch Trayvon, he might even kill him, and may have yelled those threats even in times past when he was chasing Trayvon and searching for him in the dark on previous occasions. Trayvon was cautious for these reasons to make sure George Zimmerman was not able to figure out where Trayvon Martin lived. He was actually being stalked by Zimmerman, and was somewhat in fear of being caught, the same way a cat sneaking through a dog's yard might be nervous but confident he can easily outsmart the dog and jump a wall. Some of these witnesses, those people in the community George was watching and living in, had probably heard about Trayvon, and were racist themselves, and basically had agreed that Trayvon was most likely the burglar, and if Zimmerman can catch his ass sneaking around their houses, Zimmerman should shoot his coon ass, because he has it coming to him. On the night of the homicide, Zimmerman was watching for Trayvon and also hiding, trying to figure out how Trayvon was always losing him. Trayvon was afraid to be seen going over the wall, so they were always playing cat and mouse around the buildings. Now Trayvon is extremely scared, Zimmerman is pissed, yet confident in holding his gun for protection and revenge, and as a mixed martial arts fighter, he would never scream for help because he was the go-to tough guy of this community, armed and dangerous. He was confident like a pit bull pursuing that crafty cat, and he was gonna take Trayvon head on and beat his ass and shoot him dead. He set up his alibi by calling 911. Now he needed to hang up the 911 call because he was going to catch Trayvon and make sure he knew that he was going to die that night. Just before Trayvon's death, he had once again outran Zimmerman and was hiding, trying to sneak back over his wall and into his father's fiance's backyard undetected. But he had to be sure that he had lost Zimmerman, so he poked out from his hiding spot trying to spot Zimmerman. But Zimmerman was determined not to be outfoxed again, and he found Trayvon and popped out upon him, and while pointing his gun point blank, With all the seriousness of a heart attack, he informed Trayvon that he was in fact going to die that night. George Zimmerman had told police that Trayvon Martin had told him that he, Zimmerman, was going to die that night, but that makes no sense. Not in any conceivable scenario would Trayvon Martin, a 17-year-old kid with candy, a fruity iced tea and a girl on the phone, have said those 5 words to George Zimmerman, "You're gonna die tonight," but because those 5 words have in fact come out of Zimmerman's mouth loud enough for ear witnesses to possibly have heard them, George Zimmerman had to blame those words on Trayvon Martin to cover up his own evil words. Trayvon Martin now had to stand his ground and fight for his life. He couldn't have outran a bullet in a vengeful killer's point-blank gun. Trayvon had just been told that he was going to die that night, so in fear and terror, he grabbed the arm of Zimmerman that had the gun pointing at him. This was an attempt to control the gun away from his chest. Zimmerman was getting his ass beat while struggling not to lose his grip on his gun. This made George Zimmerman even 10 times madder. Trayvon was fighting to hold the gun's nozzle and point it away from his chest.
What did you gunshot? You just said gunshot? Yes.
Now Trayvon Martin began screaming in sheer terror, "Help! Help me!" Trayvon Martin was now fighting for his life, and he realized Zimmerman was pure evil and extremely pissed and determined to render his own twisted form of perverted justice. Trayvon Martin may have punched George Zimmerman several times, then had gotten the better of him, tried to knock him out. He might have been on top at first, but Zimmerman out-wrestled Trayvon with MMA skills. George Zimmerman ended up on top. This is when Trayvon screamed the most frantically for help. So it really doesn't matter who was beating who, or who was on top when. All that makes sense is Zimmerman was pissed, confident as an MMA fighter, and he could not have been in fear at all for those 2 reasons. And why would George Zimmerman, a guy who trains in MMA fighting, and had just regained complete control of his gun, needed to have used it on a frightened kid at that point? It's obvious that whoever didn't control the gun was the one screaming for help just before the gunshot was heard. Trayvon Martin certainly would not have been hitting a guy with full control of a gun, nor could he have been banging his head on a walkway at that point in the fight, so the struggle and fight should have ended once George Zimmerman regained control of his gun. I also believe Trayvon called his friend Jeantel on the phone instead of texting her because he had a bad feeling about George Zimmerman's intent to cause him great bodily harm. Also, the Asian guy called George Zimmerman's wife and was explaining what had happened, and George interrupted the Asian man and just said, "Tell her I shot someone," and he very much had a matter-of-fact attitude about it. To me, that suggests that she had been aware that her husband George Zimmerman had either been stalking Trayvon Martin or suspected prowler, and that he was going to shoot him if he caught him in an out-of-bounds area trespassing. And she, his wife, was probably aware that he had discussed this scenario with his friends and law enforcement, and they were confident he wouldn't stand trial or be arrested for it. And actually, he almost wasn't. George Zimmerman was schooled in mixed martial arts fighting, and ironically a ground and pound took place. It's obvious to me that the Illuminati secret society Satanists are now coming out of the woodwork to protect their fellow Nephilim George Zimmerman. I understand the depth of the Illuminati conspiracy potential. I know that at least 20% of all humans on Earth are united secretly with karma, reincarnation, and satanic societies that would allow them to find fake witnesses and put together bullshit cases to save anyone of their own Illuminati Nephilim bloodline. This is exactly what the satanic Illuminati did on an epically larger scale to assassinate John F. Kennedy, and then hide the truth about the execution. And they then framed Lee Harvey Oswald and then silenced him by using Jack Ruby.
Is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means.
That's my theory, and what I see is possible evidence that backs my theory.
Fantastic LA.
Please subscribe to Eternal Black Project.
The heart is a blue. Shoots up through.
See the light. I can see the light.